For more than a century, paleontologists were haunted by a fossil they could not explain. It appeared as a tightly coiled spiral of serrated teeth, sometimes exceeding 40 centimeters in diameter, unlike anything known from modern marine life. The fossil was first described in the late 19th century by geologist Alexander Karpinski. Yet nobody could determine where the structure belonged on the animal. The creature was later named Helicoprion. For decades, theories became increasingly strange. Some reconstructions placed the spiral on the snout like a circular weapon. Others imagined it attached to the dorsal fin or hanging from the lower jaw like an external saw. The confusion existed because Helicoprion belonged to an ancient group of cartilaginous fish related to sharks. And cartilage almost never fossilizes as reliably as bone. Then, modern imaging technology transformed the mystery. In 2013, CT scans of exceptionally preserved specimens revealed the spiral embedded deep within the lower jaw. The structure functioned as a continuously growing tooth whorl. New teeth formed at the rear and rotated forward as older teeth moved inward, creating a conveyor-like cutting mechanism unlike any feeding system known today. Biomechanical studies suggest Helicoprion specialized in hunting soft-bodied cephalopods, slicing prey with rapid backward motions of the jaw. And perhaps the strangest fact of all, this evolutionary design survived for more than 250 million years. At first glance, Chaerovipteryx looks less like a real animal and more like a biological mistake. This tiny reptile lived roughly 230 million years ago during the late Triassic and measured only about 8 inches in body length. Yet despite its small size, its anatomy remains one of the strangest ever discovered in a vertebrate capable of aerial movement. Most gliding animals generate lift using membranes attached to the forelimbs or elongated ribs. Chaerovipteryx did neither. Its main flight surfaces were attached to the hind legs. Fossil impressions discovered in Kyrgyzstan revealed long skin membranes stretching from the elongated rear limbs to the tail, while the front limbs remained extremely short and lightly built. The result was an animal that looked dangerously unbalanced, almost as if evolution had placed the wings on the wrong end of the body. For decades, paleontologists struggled to understand how such a design could function aerodynamically at all. Yet computer simulations published in the 2000s indicated that the unusual body plan may actually have been surprisingly stable during gliding. The large rear membrane likely generated most of the lift, while the smaller front limbs acted as forward stabilizers, helping control pitch during descent between trees. Even so, Chaerovipteryx remains one of the strangest experiments in vertebrate flight evolution ever discovered. It did not flap like a bird. It did not glide like a squirrel. It followed an aerodynamic solution almost no modern animal has ever attempted again. Few prehistoric mammals looked stranger than Platybelodon. Living during the Miocene around 15 million years ago, this distant relative of modern elephants evolved a lower jaw unlike anything seen in mammals today. Its front jaw extended into a broad, flattened structure lined with enlarged tusks, forming a shovel-shaped feeding tool nearly 1 meter long in some specimens. Early paleontologists believed Platybelodon used this bizarre anatomy to dig roots directly from the ground or scoop aquatic plants from muddy wetlands. But microscopic wear studies later revealed something more complex. Microscopic wear patterns on the lower tusks showed repeated scratches running in specific directions, suggesting the jaw was not simply digging into soil. The animal used its jaw to strip bark, slice soft swamp vegetation, or rake through wetland plants along river systems and floodplains that spread across parts of Africa and Asia during the Miocene. Its trunk likely pulled vegetation toward the mouth, while the flattened tusks acted as giant cutting blades. Platybelodon looked almost mechanical, as though evolution had accidentally invented construction equipment millions of years before humans appeared. Among the strangest reptiles ever discovered was Drepanosaurus, a creature that looked less like a real animal and more like an unfinished evolutionary experiment. Living roughly 220 million years ago during the late Triassic, Drepanosaurus possessed one of the most unusual climbing adaptations in vertebrate history. Its tail ended in a sharply curved claw formed from modified vertebrae, creating a hook-like gripping structure unlike anything seen in modern reptiles. And that was only part of the design. Its forelimbs carried oversized hook-shaped claws, particularly on the second digit, which scientists believe were used to tear bark from trees in search of insects and larvae hidden underneath. Microscopic wear patterns on the claws support repeated scraping against rough wood surfaces rather than active hunting. This is an animal highly specialized for arboreal life. Flexible shoulder joints, grasping limbs, and a lightweight body suggest Drepanosaurus spent much of its time climbing through dense forest canopies rather than moving efficiently on the ground. It did not resemble a dinosaur, or a lizard, or any familiar reptile alive today. For over 100 years, paleontologists struggled to understand how Tanistropheus could possibly function in the real world. Its body was relatively ordinary. Its neck was not. In large individuals, the neck reached nearly 10 feet in length, longer than the torso and tail combined. Yet it was constructed from only 13 extremely elongated vertebrae. This made the structure unusually stiff, limiting flexibility, and creating what appeared to be a catastrophic design for life on land. Early reconstructions imagined Tanistropheus walking awkwardly along shorelines, dragging its impossible neck behind it. But newer fossil discoveries transformed that picture completely. Analysis of bone density, nostril placement, and tooth structure now suggests Tanistropheus spent much of its life in shallow coastal waters during the Middle Triassic, around 242 million years ago. Fossilized stomach contents containing fish scales and hook-shaped squid remains supported the reinterpretation. Underwater, the bizarre anatomy suddenly became logical. The long, rigid neck may have allowed the animal to keep its large body hidden while extending its narrow head toward prey with minimal water disturbance. An ambush strategy similar to modern aquatic hunters. What once seemed anatomically absurd became evidence of extreme specialization. The neck was not an evolutionary mistake. It simply made far more sense beneath the surface. When paleontologists first discovered Basilosaurus in the 19th century, they thought it was a giant marine reptile. Its body was long, serpentine, and unlike any modern whale, leading scientists to mistakenly classify it as a prehistoric sea lizard. The name Basilosaurus literally means king lizard, but it was not a reptile at all. Living around 40 million years ago, Basilosaurus was an early whale still carrying visible traces of its land-dwelling ancestry. Tiny external hind limbs, only about 14 inches long, projected from the body near the tail. They were far too small for walking or swimming effectively. Some researchers believe these limbs were used during mating, helping stabilize partners in shallow water. The rest of the animal was fully marine. Elongated vertebrae, powerful tail-driven swimming, and specialized teeth adapted for hunting fish and smaller whales. Basilosaurus looked unfinished, as though evolution had already committed to making a whale, but had not yet fully erased the animal it used to be. Among the strangest pterosaurs ever discovered was Nyctosaurus, a flying reptile that appeared to carry a giant radio antenna on its head. Living around 85 million years ago above the western interior seaway of North America, Nyctosaurus possessed an enormous cranial crest that in some specimens exceeded the length of the skull itself. Two long, bony projections extended upward like giant parallel rods, creating serious aerodynamic questions. Some paleontologists once proposed that a skin membrane stretched between the rods like a sail, although no direct fossil evidence has confirmed this idea. What makes the crest even stranger is that Nyctosaurus was an active flyer with a wingspan of roughly 6.5 feet. A structure this large could potentially disrupt balance and increase drag during flight. Many scientists now suspect the crest evolved primarily through sexual selection, functioning as a visual display rather than an aerodynamic advantage. Once again, evolution produced an animal that seemed to ignore ordinary engineering logic entirely. When Charles Darwin encountered fossils of Macrauchenia during his voyage aboard the HMS Beagle, even he struggled to classify the animal. It looked assembled from unrelated parts. Macrauchenia possessed the long legs and body proportions of a camel, yet its nostrils were positioned high on the skull between the eyes, suggesting the presence of a short trunk similar to a tapir. For decades, scientists debated where it belonged on the mammalian family tree. The answer remained unclear because South America spent much of the Cenozoic isolated from other continents, allowing mammals there to evolve along highly unusual evolutionary paths for tens of millions of years. Living until roughly 20,000 years ago, Macrauchenia became one of the last survivors of this strange, isolated ecosystem. It did not fit neatly into familiar categories. And perhaps that is exactly why Darwin found it so fascinating. Evidence that evolution does not follow human expectations, only environmental opportunity. For years, paleontologists reconstructed a Topodentatus completely incorrectly. Early fossils suggested a strange marine reptile with a downward curving beak, leading scientists to imagine a predator feeding on shellfish along the seafloor. But newly discovered skull specimens from China revealed something far stranger. The front of the jaws formed a broad, hammer-shaped structure lined with dozens of thin, needle-like teeth, while the rear teeth were densely packed into filter-like arrays. The mouth looked almost mechanical, like a biological zipper opening sideways across the skull. Living roughly 242 million years ago in shallow coastal seas, a Topodentatus was not a hunter at all. It appears to have been fed by scraping algae from underwater rocks and filtering plant material through dense rows of teeth. One of the earliest known examples of herbivory in marine reptiles after the Permian extinction. The bizarre jaw suddenly made sense. Not as a weapon, but as a highly specialized feeding adaptation built for a recovering Triassic ecosystem, where entirely new ecological experiments were beginning to appear. Few prehistoric reptiles have caused more scientific arguments than Longisquama. Discovered in Middle to Late Triassic deposits dating roughly 230 million years ago in present-day Kyrgyzstan, Longisquama was a small reptile with a highly unusual feature. Long, ribbon-like structures extending from its back, some measuring over 4 inches in length. And scientists still debate what those structures actually were. Some researchers argued they represented early feather-like appendages, potentially connected to the origins of feathers long before true birds evolved. Others rejected that interpretation entirely, proposing that the structures were modified scales used for display rather than insulation or flight. The controversy deepened when some paleontologists suggested Longisquama may have used these elongated appendages while gliding between trees. Although direct evidence for powered or controlled flight remains weak. Even today, the fossil remains difficult to interpret because preservation is incomplete. Was it experimenting with aerial movement, displaying for mates, or evolving structures unrelated to feathers entirely? Longisquama remains fascinating precisely with no definitive answer yet. The prehistoric world was filled with animals that now seem almost impossible. Spiral-toothed sharks, reptiles with hind leg wings, and creatures assembled from body plans that appear completely alien to us today. Yet for millions of years, they were ordinary parts of Earth's ecosystems. surviving, hunting, and adapting in worlds far older and stranger than our own. The history of life was never a march toward perfection. It was billions of years of experiments, and some of the strangest experiments succeeded. If you enjoy exploring the real science behind prehistoric Earth, subscribe and join us for more journeys into the forgotten history of life on this planet.